Hey there, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. Second day in a row, we're going to have quite big news with regarding to war in Ukraine. This time, the new sanction packages coming from unbelievable the US, and the sanctions are pretty serious. More than that, the Gripens that we discussed yesterday are actually going to be coming much sooner to Ukraine than everyone was expecting. And besides that, we see that Russia is struggling with their economy, despite the fact that they're trying to show that everything is fine. Please don't panic. Pretty please, but it's not really working. In yesterday's video, we discussed about the purchase of about 100 to 150 Gripen airplanes coming from Sweden to Ukraine, and they were rumored to be paid by Russia. And now we got a little bit more confirmation on the fact that it's going to be some kind of mechanism that will allow Russian either frozen assets or in other ways, it will be Russian assets that they will be paying for these planes going to Ukraine. According to the Guardian, Swedish Defense Minister Paul Jonsson has stated that agreement is quite realistic and government is currently analyzing several possible options of its implementation. He added that the final decision will be dependent on the position of the European Union and the coordination of legal mechanisms, hinting at the Russian frozen assets, and we're going to touch on those a bit later. Quote, "We are exploring the potential of use of frozen Russian assets," Johnson said. "The cost of the Gripen E-fighters jets is approximately $85 million, so in order to get 100 aircrafts, it is estimated to be about $8.5 billion. And if it's going to be paid for Russia, that's going to be fantastic. But what is more important is some additional rumors and clarifications that came since yesterday that while Ukraine is aiming to get the E variant of the Gripen, the latest one, it is seemingly the CD variants that are already present in the Swedish Air Force could already be sold to Ukrainians in 2026. I'm assuming this is going to be mostly for training the personnel around them, and just general preparations for the platforms to appear in larger quantities. So if everything goes as planned, and if the rumors are indeed true, then we will see Gripens in Ukrainian sky operating already next year. And hopefully, we will also get a confirmation that they will be paid by Russia. And then big news coming from Donald Trump's administration that really warmed up my heart. Trump's administration has imposed sanctions on two Russia's largest oil companies, Lukoil and Rosneft. The measures freeze all US-based assets of those companies. They also pave the way for secondary sanctions against foreign institutions that handle transactions with those on the blacklist. More than that, Rosneft and Lukoil are pillars of Russian economy. Together, they account for nearly half of the country's crude oil exports, around 3.1 million barrels per day, according to the Russian estimates. Again, half of Russian oil just got hard-line sanctioned. The impact is already ripping through the global markets. India, one of Russia's largest buyers, is reportedly expected to sharply curtail its imports, to reduce purchase from Russian Rosneft and Lukoil to virtually zero. And the same is happening with China. According to Reuters, Chinese state-owned oil companies have also suspended purchases of seaborne Russian crude following the sanctions, amid fears of potential secondary sanctions. Hungarian Prime Minister, and that's the only kind of thing that we need to be aware of, is that Viktor Orban publicly said on October 24 that the Budapest is working on finding a way to bypass the US sanctions, as his country, along with Slovakia, is the biggest buyer of Russian oil in the European Union. We are working on how to circumvent these sanctions. So Viktor Orban is just coming out and stating, hey, we're going to try to circumvent your US sanctions. There you go, Donald. So what we need to understand, firstly, this is fantastic news. My biggest frustration with Donald Trump's administration was always one and only one, is that declared peace through strength was never exercised. That US, despite having using the language of Donald Trump, all the cards on its hands, were unwilling to play these cards, to put pressure actually on Russia to bring the end of the war closer. It was always more of a carrot and not really any of the stick. This is actually the first real thing and real stick that actually hurts. So Donald Trump's actions, the actions of his administrations, and imposing of these sanctions right now have brought the war closer to an end than it was before. This is a fantastic move, and I cannot stop praising that this is good way forward. There are a couple of buts here. But number one is that these sanctions, while initially very devastating, right now Russians are just scrambling. We are seeing on the Russian propaganda channels within Russian insiders, they are in absolute fire panic mode. Their asses are on fire. And this is good. But the sanctions, as stated by Viktor Orban himself, the sanctions will be circumvented. It will still be a cost for Russia because getting around the direct sales channels will still be more costly than selling oil directly. However, it is still going to be circumvented. So it's important not to just impose the sanctions, but also have mechanisms on keeping these sanctions up, to putting the secondary pressure on the companies. And this is what I will be following through very much so. Biden's administration, despite not doing enough, and I was criticizing them plenty for it, they were pretty good, specifically Janet Yellen, they were pretty good on following up on the sanctions that have been imposed and actually going after the companies that were trying to circumvent these sanctions. But here, it's going to be something to look out for, specifically through Malaysia. Malaysia is buying a lot of oil, and they are using a lot of their scheme to try to mix their oil and send them later to China or India, and they might do it as well. And second part is that Russia is going to try to get us off this track as soon as possible. Already now we get news that Dmitriev, Russian envoy to US, Kirill Dmitriev, is already heading for the United States to talk with the US envoy Steve Witkoff, who is known basically for one thing and one thing only, that he is a complete parrot of any and all Russian points. The good news is a little bit in this scenario is because Witkoff messed up the information from Russian side that led to meeting in Anchorage, Alaska, that he was a little bit sidestepped, and instead it's seemingly that Rubio is the one that is more, I don't want to say lead because we don't really see who is leading this direction. It's been alternating from time to time, but Marco Rubio has a little bit clearer understanding on who Russians are and how they want to go forward. I still cannot see US as an ally. I still feel that Trump's administration is looking for this war to end one way or another. Like, even if just a frozen conflict, it's good enough. But this extra pressure on Putin is definitely good, and we only need to take the current actions of Trump's administration and impact that these actions have been having as positive. Andriy Yermak, a right hand to President Zelensky, has been talking with some of the journalists, and he actually outlined an interesting case that we should be all aware of. That Russia right now is cracking at the seams, and different scenarios might arouse. Quote, "The war has already come to their territory. Any empire, any dictatorship is built on violence. There are those who submitted to it for various reasons, interests, benefits or fear. But there are so many, even the majority, who are simply afraid," Yermak said. He noted that fear inevitably weakens once an empire begins, quote, "to shake and crack at the seams. That's when," he added, "completely unexpected scenarios begin to emerge. And that moment is not far away." And I think this is a fantastic thing, and I want to underscore this once again. that any dictatorship, specifically like Russia, they seem rock solid. They seem that despite all of the pressure, they just keep on keeping on, and the pressure is there, and it is pretty big. And Russia, specifically dictatorship like Russian, can fall apart in different scenarios. It could be a coup, it could be even civil unrest. I don't really expect it, but it's not impossible to see it. It was happening in Imperial Russia. So with Russia now struggling more and more and more, new possibilities and scenarios open, and new opportunities that could be taken by people that don't like Putin as much, despite his maintain on power. And Russia is not doing a lot of good stuff to really help their case. Russian central bank had had a meeting in which they discussed lowering the interest rate. The interest rate is important to keep high because it prevents Russian inflation to skyrocket, to put it simply. And for a very long time, Russian central bank kept the interest rate really high. The problem of keeping the interest rate high is that companies cannot get cheap loans. Therefore, they cannot really grow their businesses because loans are too expensive. So they're smothering their entrepreneurship in the country. It's becoming impossible to have any kind of business that is not fully subsidized from the state. So central bank was really pushed hard this year, insane pressure hard, to lower the interest rate. And everyone was hoping that the interest rate will be lowered to 10, maximum 12%, because that is the level at which at least some of the injections of funds as a loans into the Russian budget can actually start becoming sort of a making sense. Because otherwise, if it's over 14%, then loans that Russia take to, for example, fill in the budget of the country and subsidize some of the companies, the loan percentage are just so steep that it's not becoming worth it to actually take these loans, because the percentage payments are gonna be insanely high, bigger than the loan itself. But the pressure that was accumulating on the Russian central bank is political in nature rather than economic. Because economic rules are stating that at current situation Russia is in, with huge budget deficit, with skyrocketing inflation, and really bad economy prospects, they need to put interest rate quite high, because otherwise they're gonna get really screwed. And right now they are caving in symbolically. They are lowering the interest rate from 17% to 16.5%, which is, to be honest, it's not one scenario or another. Some people are arguing that this is actually even worse, because in this scenario, they are not doing anything. They're not really fighting the inflation with the high interest rate, but they're also not really stimulating the business by having the access to cheaper, at least, some kind of loans. So it's bad ends from everywhere. By this lowering of interest rate by 0.5%, Russian state basically signing off that they cannot do anything. They just are completely screwed, and it's very clear they will be transitioning fully to the state-run economy. With the winter coming and Ukrainians being heavily bombarded by the Russians targeting their civilian infrastructure, Germany has contributed 60 million euros to the Ukrainian Energy Support Fund, which will be used, among other things, to supply generators, energy equipment, and mobile thermal power plants. Quote, Germany is strengthening the resilience of our critical infrastructure by contributing 60 million euros to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund. These funds will help accelerate the deliveries of generators, energy equipment, and mobile thermal power plants. I thank German Economy Minister Katharina Reiche for the decision, Sviridenko said. This help is really valuable because it targets specifically the most vulnerable people in Ukrainian society. Thank you so much to people and government of Germany. France increases missile production and aid to Ukraine. France will order additional Aster and Scalp EG missiles within the 2026 budget. France, Italy, and the United Kingdom have already ordered 1,118 Aster missiles under a joint contract. And now, for the next year, France is aiming to do even more. Thank you so much to people and government of France for the support. A very reassuring statement from the Europeans, which is that Europe is aiming to support Ukraine financially for the 2 upcoming years. It's a very important statement because it's a commitment that can guarantee long-term support for Ukraine. Putin is really aiming to destabilize Ukraine, destabilize support for Ukraine, and basically his only strategy is to outweigh the Western world. He thinks that if you put pressure long enough on the democracies and you don't back off of any of your demands, then at some moment someone will cave in. And the fact that Europeans not only not caving in, but are making commitments and statements and actually following it up with tranches of funds, this is what is going to support Ukraine long-term and prevent Putin's strategy from working. Italy is preparing 12 Ukraine aid package focused on ammunition and air defense. Italy is preparing their package on military assistance for Ukraine with the main focus on ammunition and missiles for the SMT air defense systems. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the government of Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has sent 11 aid packages worth total of 2.5-3 billion euros. Noting that Italy has already delivered 2 SAMP-T batteries to Kyiv, other details of the package have not been disclosed. Italy also plans to join NATO's Pearl program, which is aimed at procuring US weapons for Ukraine with European funds. Thank you so much to people and government of Italy. I already mentioned that Russia has introduced new glide bombs that are able to fly 150 to 200 kilometers. Essentially, these bombs are older 250 kilo bombs that Russia put some wings on so they can glide in the air, and now they strapped in additional jet engine to help the initial boosting phase of that missile. And once it now has been discovered and the debris have been analyzed, it is clear that these are coming from China. So China is fully supplying Russia with weapon systems and additional systems for their weapons to kill Ukrainian citizens. Yesterday, we had news about Russia striking Ukrainian kindergarten and with kids. Well, it could have been with one of the Chinese-made weapons. And China is not really seeming to be very sorry for that. And let's finish on a high note. Here is the video. Ukraine has been hunting for the Russian air defense systems in Crimea, and 2 Nebo-M radars have been struck. They're valued at about $100 million each. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hear some really great news coming from the front lines with Ukrainians counterattacking in multiple places. So be sure to tune in to the frontline update at the end of this week. In any case, continue supporting Ukraine, support the Ukrainian armed forces. I love you. Slava Ukraini, and I will see you next time.